Hello and welcome to this episode of The Exchange, and today we're discussing value added taxes or VAT specifically on digital services. And to broach on the topic, we have with us Mr. Indika De Zoysa. He is the Vice President of the Computer Society of Sri Lanka. Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me.
So just to kick things off, I think we can get explanation on you on what this VAT or VAT is and how it applies to digital services.
Okay, so before getting into the digital services, even for a normal goods and services what we consume every day, in modern day we pay value added tax of 18%. You can buy any good from the shop, or like when you go to a hotel and take the services, which is value, you will say in that bottom of the bill it says VAT 18%, right? So now similar way, now you in the modern world, a lot of services are being consumed, or you do a lot of imports or transactions, or you book your taxis through digital platforms. That also getting applied same way as the traditional goods and services. So what has happened is, like some time back, value added tax was introduced to services what developed in Sri Lanka. We say application software has been developed in Sri Lanka, which is owned by a Sri Lankan company, and the services are delivered in the country. You are liable to pay value added tax. Certain companies will show separately the value added tax in the invoices. Certain companies, they absorb by themselves and it doesn't show, it only gives you a final value of that. Now the new change what has happened from, or going to happen from 1st of October is that all this time if the services is delivered from offshore, from another country, that value added tax was not applicable. If say companies in Europe or US or one of those countries, you can deliver the service in the country, but value added tax is not charged. But you take a scenario now, similar service, we say taxi service, a Sri Lankan owned company is providing the taxi service in Sri Lanka and a foreign company is providing the service. So Sri Lankan company pays VAT, but foreign company doesn't. Now after this new change, both the companies has to pay VAT. So it will become a more for equal play field. So it's up to the company whether that value added tax will be passed into the consumer or absorbed by them, or a percentage absorbed by them, or percentage. So it's obviously defined by the market conditions and the demand supply and the competitiveness of the environment. So that's how. Now again, if you are taking certain things, like now say simple example, like you are a gamer. Now in this, gaming also been included in that. Now you take a $10, $20 game you buy and play. For that, there's going to be value added tax, which is the company need to pay, the supplier. Now again, it's a market driven situation. If the company decided to put the VAT into the consumer, then that means if you are taking a $10 one, you have to pay 18% more for that $10. So there's an incremental cost. Similar way, if you are taking a cloud services, if you are a corporate, when VAT in, VAT out, you don't have an impact. But if you are a small timer, or say you have your email stored in one of those email boxes in a cloud, which you pay, I don't know, $5 a month or like $50 a year, that will have. Again, it's up to that company whether it's pass it to you or absorb.
So now, thanks to all this being digital, we're suddenly dealing with companies that are established out of the country and also companies that are not legally established in Sri Lanka. So how do you think the IRD will face the challenge of dealing with this brand new type of entity that is not even legally in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, so with the modern world, that is going to be the key way, right? If I ask you a simple question, who is the biggest taxi company in the world? You say a brand, how many taxis they have? They don't have a single taxi. It's application, right? Or if I ask the question, what is the biggest hotel chain in the world? It's not the traditional names what we used to hear. It's a platform, millions of rooms, but they don't own a single room. So that's where the world will evolve from a digital point of view, right? So you don't have to be physically present in a country, but obviously you can do business remotely. So now you take all the big brands, these brands, when you really look at it, they are bigger than our economy, our GDP. All these companies really looking after their compliances. So none of the companies are looking at breaking any laws of any nation which is they are in. So all these companies generally has larger teams of compliance, and they have in the headquarters as well as regionally. So if there are any regulations, so before they enter into the market, they do the due diligence. and they figure out what are the rules and regulations of the country, what are the labor laws of the country, what taxation they have to do. They do that due diligence only they are enter into the market, because they don't want any headlines anywhere. XYZ company had a breach in that country, because that's brand value itself is huge. So they will obviously adhere to that. With the new change coming in, they will have some presence, or they will use company secretaries as such entities, and they will work through them, do the needful registration of the TIN number or IRD, whatever need to be done. So they will follow that procedure, and they will make sure declaration of the value and paying of required taxes, these companies will adhere. That's generally the practice across the world.
Right. Now, as you have said, it is highly unlikely that we will see an incident of non-compliance from one of these billion-dollar companies. But do you think if it comes to that, what options does the IRD have in terms of action for non-compliance?
So I think they have already declared certain penalties will be done, even going up to the level of blacklisting, right? So in my view, with being
server blacklisting,
that's what I can remember from the obviously penalties has been disclosed. It's a normal practice, right? Even a local company doesn't pay on time, there are penalties, and certain repercussions will be there. So now if way it is, which are being in the industry for like 30 years or so, very unlikely such incident can happen in the global environment, because say all these brands where they are originated from, they need to adhere to their compliances in their respective country as well. So, and also there are like the World Trade Organization, etc., global organizations also being part of that environment, they will not break rules and regulations. So that is a very extreme situation if we see somebody breaching the, or running away of not paying the required taxes.
Right. Now we see 120 or so countries that apply these digital service VATs. But there are also markets where this is not applied in.
Yes.
So what will happen if a user tries to use something like a VPN to access the service in one of these markets instead of the local market?
There are fewer countries who doesn't have, as well as there are countries who has lower certain taxes. But again, you can obviously do a VPN and do that, but from a technology point of view, you're risking your life. Because if you use your phone, you have your banking applications, your social media accounts, to you name it, your official emails. Technically, if somebody hacks your phone, like you're dead, right, in modern day. So if you're opening up, it's like you're going to sleep without locking your front door, keeping your front door open. So now, if some extreme situations, extreme people can really work around, but that will be really a high risk of trying to save a couple of dollars. So I don't see a situation people will resort to that kind of thing. I can remember some time back, certain blackouts came for social media, etc. People use this mode of VPNs and all that. But there are so many people got hacked and got exposed. So I'm not quite sure whether people want to risk their all the assets and the bank accounts to everything by opening up VPNs and trying to get into another market and do that.
I like your confidence in giving the benefit of doubt both to the user and the companies in this case. Right, coming back to the tax itself, if we take an example like a taxi company, now there's a part of the process of getting a taxi that happens on the app, which is with the foreign entity, which would be matching you to a driver. And then the second part, like I said, matching, once the driver has been matched, you make a payment to this driver to a service that is given physically. So could you detail on which part of this transaction is subject to this VAT? Is it the whole fare in this case, or just what we pay the company in terms of a commission or a service fee?
So generally, is the company pay for the service that they deliver, because that's a pass-through, right? So service they deliver, and also they have a certain markup, or we say margin, we can call it. So that's where the tax will be basically coming in. So that's where that part of the company revenue will become that. So now in our case, say you may have a credit card payment, it will go to the company's account and it will go through the driver, or driver will collect cash and they need to deposit whatever the percentage which is they are supposed to return to the company. So that's where that differentiation will come in.
Right. Now, more on differentiation and figuring out what exactly gets taxed. Now, these are services that have things like, pay-as-you-go models, various pricing models, subscriptions, dynamic pricing. How can an already possibly struggling IRD keep up with all these new sort of payment models, payment methods, and how are they going to ensure accurate reporting and make sure that they get a hold of what these companies are doing in the country?
Yeah, in my understanding, I don't think IRD need to go after all that models as such, because it's become the responsibility of the respective company to report out. This is my revenue, this is the transaction what I did, and this is the tax percentage. Like it's like a filing your.
But they have to validate that reporting, right?
Obviously, like it will be done by auditors, right? It's not the case of like, I come in one day morning and saying, hey, this is my income, this is my tax, right? So all these global companies run with the best of the whatever global auditing companies. Their auditing reports will be published, and these are majority are public. So you have all these reports publicly available, as well as there's method. Even there can be a rare case somebody is trying to evade, or if there's a suspicion, obviously IRD had to do the required whatever investigation. It's not alone IRD, like then you have the global environment, which is it'll help them to manage that. So as I said before, it's an extreme case somebody is trying to run away or under declare, or some kind of a game will be played, because IT companies has, or global companies in multinationals operate in many part of the world, that compliance is a prime thing. So even since I have worked in multinationals, which is I know, we had to go through training every 6 months as such about compliance, about self-declarations. That is for staff itself. So this compliance is a one thing, because nobody wants anywhere in the world catching a headline somebody, that company broke regulations of a country and impacting their brand. As I said, the brand values are bigger than our economy.
Now, Sri Lanka always boasts of ambitious targets when it comes to digital economy, and this has been a priority for this administration in specific. Now, how do you think this new value-added tax specifically on digital services will impact this, particularly things like technology adoption?
Yeah, I think it's more than a boasting. I will say this is, we don't have a choice for setting up ambition targets, right? We have set up a $15 billion digital economy contribution to the national economy by 2030. So right now when you're looking at, we are less than 5%, but global average is about 15 to 20%. So we are below the global average, right? So that's why even government has looked at, or they have already created the digital economy ministry itself, specifically focus on that. As industry, we are very much aligned with that focus. So we are doing a lot of activations on this. So as the government, as the industry, as industries or IT industries helping the other industries also for digitization. Now there are so many things coming in this equation. Now we are talking about GovPay, which is being, now you say your government payment can be paid using payment fintech, right? So similarly, you have global environments or global companies coming and linking with our Sri Lankan banks, etc., which is tourists can be able to pay using the QR codes in China or India, or their payment gateways can be done. So globally, it's getting connected. And that is where the contribution to the digital economy will come in. Now, from a traditional goods and services, which is the government revenue, what they are getting, versus when you're moving toward the digital focus, government has one, they need to make sure that revenue doesn't drop, as well as local companies are protected as usual. And then what will happen is, when soon as you introduce something, obviously the demand supply situation will come in, and certain dips can come. As I said, some companies will absorb, consumer will not feel anything. The cost will be same for the end user. But some companies will pass it to the consumer, it will get little increase, or value added tax is 18% in this case can. So there can be a smaller dip, but over a period of time, this curves back. Because now digital has become you need to use it for your day-to-day life. It's not the case you can avoid it and you can move on it. You can be a corporate if you are doing, now today when you're looking at advertising cost, social media or digital is the majority of the cost. So you can't say, no, I'm going back to traditional, because even you go to traditional, still you pay VAT, right? So it's not the case that somebody will move away. Maybe with your budgeting, etc., if this is getting passed into your bottom line, people can reduce a bit. But obviously, I don't see a major impact as such. that it can erode or has a full stop on it. Obviously, there can be a temporary hiccup until things get settled.
Right. That moves perfectly into my final question. That possible impact of this VAT, is that risk worth the possible revenue generation that we're going to do from this VAT? How do you think the Sri Lankan administration should balance both of these, considering, like you said, that we are already behind in terms of things like digital economy adoption?
Okay. So I'll take a good example on that. Like say 1.5 years ago, after 2005, they introduced VAT for hardware imports, your laptops and the computers what you're importing. Now, after the VAT introduced for the hardware, there is a large percentage we start coming from what you call a grey channel, even today. So now, if it is if you get in the required revenue to the government, in my view, no, from a hardware import point of view. So there's government would have got 100, now after VAT introduced, maybe larger percentage moved to the grey channel. It has, government would have lost in the estimation when looking at the market point of view. But from a services point of view, this is not not touching intangible thing, right? So services has been consumed. So there's an audit trail. So you know who used it, what is the exact value. You can't do one-day invoicing or you can't hand carry it, what you call it in a normal language, right? So here people has to pay for it and there's a track of it. So very unlikely people will play around it, as I said. And it's not the only case of revenue generation. One thing is revenue, and also there's a big case of protecting the Sri Lankan companies, which is getting to an equal field, right? So there's pluses, there's minuses, but overall, I think in my view, with looking at the market condition and looking at the neighboring countries, it is more or less getting to an equal field. Some countries actually call these taxes equalization tax. Versus
India does.
India does like that. India call it equalization tax. So it's like a foreign company versus a local company. They are trying to equalize it. So obviously you will have a temporary hiccup, but in my view it will obviously settle down and it will move on.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that insightful explanation. And that's it for this episode of The Exchange. This is Avin Indrasoma for the Hero Media Network.